PRovoke podcast is brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialists Marketeers. Support for this podcast comes from Notified, the integrated, intelligent and easy-to-use PR software. Get a free demo today at notified.com.
Hello and welcome to this special PRovoke podcast. This is part of a series that we are doing on data-informed innovation with our friends from Imre. And we have two guests with us today. We have Lindsay McGettigan, who is a Senior VP and Activation Group Director at Imre. Welcome, Lindsay. And we have Ryan Billings, who is Head of U.S. Oncology Digital Marketing and Customer Experience at GSK. So thanks to both of you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we're talking about, we'll get right into it. We're talking about data-informed innovation. What is data-informed innovation? I always struggle a little bit with the word innovation because everything is innovation, right? So anything new is innovation, any thought is innovation. What is data-informed innovation?
Sure. So I'll jump in. So to me, we'll just taking a quick step back to innovation, because to your point, what is innovation? I get asked that a lot. I think it means a lot of different things to different people. But to me, it's really just around, finding new or more efficient ways to do things, or it can be solving a very specific business problem or meeting a business objective through a new and different way. And it doesn't always have to be digital or technology. It could be something, like a change in a process or something more traditional, but it's new and it's different. It's just thinking about something differently. And then the data-informed innovation piece, I think that's so critical because I think, there's a lot of folks in innovation roles or who wear innovation hats. And where I've seen people fail is that they kind of get that shiny new object syndrome and they chase solutions and they lead with the solution when they're evangelizing that innovation versus being data informed and starting data first. And for someone who is creative brained like myself, and I think like a lot of PR professionals and marketers and branding professionals and storytellers, it can be scary to start with the data, but it's so important because you want to avoid any holes that could be poked into your idea at the get-go. So when you start with the insights and the data, when it comes to introducing innovation, it makes it harder for anyone to question it. And you're more likely to succeed. So that's kind of what it means to me.
Lindsay, any thoughts on that?
I totally echo everything Ryan said about how innovation, yes, there's an element of something new, but it doesn't have to be new for the sake of new. It's a new way to solve a problem or a new way of approaching something. And when you think about data, we want to be data first and also remember the human element of that data. So never losing sight of the people-centric and behavioral element of data. I think innovation comes from that fusion of people-focused behavioral data with whatever the cultural and contextual environment is at the moment. And if we think about a lot of the innovative campaigns and things that we saw coming out of COVID-19 and quarantine and the entire year of 2020, a lot of the innovation was really meeting people in the moment and using data to find a creative solution that hits on that intersection.
Well, that's really, speaking at a moment like COVID, that's tough, right? Because brands have to kind of walk that line between being empathetic and being in your face. And by the time people are done with it, they don't want to hear anymore. That all comes from data. And I guess data is always moving, right? Always transitioning. Yes.
Yeah, when I think about the empathy piece, and it's funny, like you wouldn't usually think data and empathy together in the same sentence, but I read an article recently about a McKinsey study that was done not post-COVID because we're still living it, but later. And basically the companies who were able to accelerate digital transformation by 3 to 4 years because of COVID, and the ones that were successful in that acceleration, it was because they were able to close the empathy gap.
What do you mean by that?
Well, to close the customer experience gap through empathy. And what that means is they anticipated and understood the needs of their customers, instead of kind of trying to assume what they needed or wanted. A good example of that, so I work in the pharmaceutical space, and a lot of what we do is marketing or communicating to oncologists and physicians. And when COVID hit, sales reps were not able to see their customers anymore. And there was a lot of scrambling, trying to decide, what do we do? Can we have reps meet virtually with physicians? And that did work for a while, but at the end of the day, like, HCPs are people too, and they had kids home from school, they had telemedicine appointments, they didn't necessarily have time to be taking remote meetings with sales reps from pharma companies. So took a step back, we asked them, how can we get what we believe is important information to you about new products, new indications, therapeutic areas, disease states? How can we best serve you? And they told us, I would love to be able to access video content that's quick, it's digestible, it's snackable, and it's on my terms, it's on demand. So that helped us pivot how we were delivering and creating content and meeting their needs. So I think that's a good example of kind of closing that customer experience gap in a data-informed way through empathy.
You mentioned data-informed and customer empathy gap and customer experience, all that. But what it sounds like a lot of it comes down to is asking people what they want, which maybe
Totally.
It's not new. It's the way that we do it, right?
Absolutely. And then, and you find out a lot of context from those exercises, things that are important to people, things that you wouldn't get from just looking at straight up, analytics and kind of reporting and things like that. Things that you can layer on top of some of that more traditional data, I guess.
Right. So you can't take away the human element from the data.
The human element.
Right?
That's a perfect way to put it. Yeah.
And data to some degree has always been there, but in different forms. We talked earlier in the week and we talked about like old-fashioned focus groups. Was that data? Was that the start of data? Customer surveys, was that data?
Definitely. I mean, I think sometimes there's a tendency to think data is an exported spreadsheet of numbers, and that you sift through the numbers and plop them into an algorithm and it spits out what you're supposed to do next. But data is what you're hearing from real people. It's when you stop and take a moment to listen to what they want, or when you look at where they're spending time and what their behaviors are. All of that, while it might be more qualitative, is really important data, especially when you're considering new channels, new content mediums, and everything that's new and different in the digital marketing world to try to drive innovation.
Are there examples you can share with us of or ways that it's been used? Because we talk about words, but then I like to see the concrete.
Yeah, so one example that we are proud of that we worked on last year is for Lumify, which is one of our clients. And I think it's a great example of using data on people's preferences and behaviors and habits and really fusing it with the context of the moment to inform an innovative channel and content approach. So for this example, we started thinking about TikTok in early 2020 in March, like many people who started hearing about it a lot more. COVID disruption created an opportunity for TikTok. I think we were noticing a dramatic increase in US downloads. I have some stats that by March 23rd, in 2020, monthly downloads to date were 6.2 million, which is up 27% compared to the first 23 months of February 2020. Mm-hmm. So our social teams were starting to take notice of this channel trend. And then by the time we eventually took this idea to our client's approval team, TikTok was the most downloaded video app in the world with 52 million global users and 185 billion average monthly views. So that's one part of the data is you're looking at all these statistics that are coming out saying, hey, this channel is popping in this moment. Should we take notice of it? But you really can't go. You have to keep going. You can't just stop there. So we were thinking about Lumify, which is in the beauty category, and what are beauty brands doing on TikTok? So we noticed that there was a big increase in beauty brands gravitating towards TikTok. I think 15% of the world's top global beauty brands had an official TikTok account as of last April, as we were continuing to develop this idea. And we had all these cosmetic challenges that you saw popping up while people were staying at home, like the e.l.f. Vanishing Act. That campaign had 12.9 million views when it launched. And a lot of these brands were reporting that organic engagement on TikTok was really driving sales. And another great example is the skincare brand, The Ordinary, saw like a 426% sales spike on a product that was just entirely boosted by TikTok users. So then we're thinking, okay, we have data saying this channel's popping. We have data that it makes sense for our industry. And then it always has to come back to, does it make sense for our consumer? Is there an opportunity for our brand based on the person? So what we did is we looked into consumer behavior habits and sourced a survey from CPG Strategy that reported over 70% of female Gen Z consumers, which was our target audience for Lumify, were using Amazon for product discovery and attributing that shift to TikTok. TikTok influencers were driving impact by creating these videos with the hashtag Amazon Finds. So with all of this data together from different lenses, from the landscape and contextual lens, from the channel lens, from the industry lens, from the audience lens, we could validate that TikTok advertising was a channel and an opportunity that both met the moment and met the evolved behaviors of the Lumify buyer. So it was really innovation backed by data in the purest sense, and is one of our agency's proud moments of 2020 and pivoting and trying to find innovation backed in data.
I believe it. And then how do you, but you also have to find your space in that, right? If everybody's on TikTok at that time, you also have to use data, I imagine, to pinpoint your targets or to boost your content or whatever it is that you do on TikTok. That's the other
right. And looking at data on performance to optimize and reallocate spend towards the targeting or segments or audience segments that are taking the actions that we're wanting them to take.
Right. And Ryan, you've worked for in global businesses, local businesses, or locally focused accounts. Is data as applicable for a small business as it is for a big global business or big account or an initiative that you're doing?
Yeah, I think data, like innovation, data is such a loaded, big word that is subject to lots of different interpretation. There's all different kinds of data, but I think at the end of the day, whether you're a big company, small company, well-known brand, little-known brand, you really need to inform your content strategy and what's going to resonate with your audiences with data. And that's changing all the time. I think one of my favorite examples from my career was back at AstraZeneca in the early days of social media. And we were working on a loss of exclusivity of a brand that is very, very well known called Nexium. I'm sure you've heard of it. And back then, this was 2014, there really were not social communities built around products yet. Like that wasn't really a thing. We didn't have these like digital to direct to consumer brands out yet. And but there was brand equity in the world. So we took a look at the data and we realized that through social listening insights, our customers, they loved this brand. They loved that it made them feel better right away. They loved the kind of brand presence it had. And, it was very iconic in that it was the purple pill. It had a lot going for it. And while the patient population was split evenly in terms of male and female, the insights were telling us that it was about, I think, north of 80% women who were talking about it in this like brand affinity kind of way. So we actually used that case study and those insights to build a social community around this product to help kind of hold on to that equity as we would see generic competitors come in. And, I definitely believe that not every pharma brand is set up to have a community base, but there are going to be instances where that is appropriate and helpful, and that was one of them, and it was certainly the first. So yeah, I mean, sure, like data is really important again, like no matter where you are.
End of our story. Data is important.
Yeah, I kind of forgot where I was going with that, but it's important to look at like, is there a case for this,
Yes.
whether it's big or small? And that was a huge brand.
And Ryan, how was that question? Oh, please go ahead. Hear from you, then from me.
Sure. Well, just being familiar with that campaign, I think another element is that it felt culturally relevant for the moment. I know that we did something that was a play on that really popular is the dress meme. Is the dress blue or is it gold? And everyone was talking about that and sending it to their friends. And it was a big cultural storyline and just a societal storyline. And to be able to leverage that concept and bring it into the pharma space made that campaign have even more relevancy from a contextual perspective.
Especially because it was a brand that was so recognizable by its color. It made sense to what was it called? Like brand. I forget what that, like hijacking, hashtag hijacking or something. It made sense for us. It wouldn't make sense for every brand.
Yes.
So that's important too, to make sure that, your everything having to do with your brand aligns with that kind of meme moment.
Right. Yeah. And this for both of you, I mean, how in pharma in particular, do you deal with certain kinds of data and innovation questions? It must be different than your regular consumer brands, right? I mean, it's such a sensitive arena. It's so regular.
Yeah.
How have you seen it evolve over, the time that data has sort of been ramping up and used more specifically?
Having been in the social space, specifically in pharma, for a long time, even before there was guidance from the FDA on how to compliantly use social media and mobile, it's come a long way. We were very reticent as a industry to really tap into social, but there came a tipping point where we just knew our patients and our customers are there. We're missing out. We have to be there. They're going to talk about us, whether we're joining the conversation or not. So we've come a long way from being really afraid of finding like adverse events and product quality complaints on social and that kind of thing. And I think the biggest thing when it comes to data, especially on the patient side, is privacy. That's so, you have HIPAA and all these other rules, and we want to respect our patients and we want to respect their privacy, but we also want to serve them, relevant and most importantly, helpful information they need. They're navigating all sorts of information. I mean, think about, in my case, in oncology, like it's very overwhelming to try to sift through what's out there, what are the latest treatments, and what's the latest research. They're very scientifically leaned in. So it can definitely be tricky to make sure that we are, of course, complying with privacy rules and regulations, but also being able to find these often small patient populations. And we've been able to do that. I think a great area, again, to be able to do that is on social. To understand what's important to these people, what kind of groups and advocacy organizations are they engaging with, and can we serve them the right content in that way?
Right. I imagine that I've heard that the sort of micro targeting, especially in pharma, is just huge advantage, because you can have with a rare disease and there's hundreds, not millions of people that have it, right? And you still need to serve those people.
We need to find them.
And how have you, Lindsay, seen things evolve? I mean, do you still see people scared of data? Do you have to still convince? Is there still that shiny new object fascination that Ryan talked about at the beginning, or are clients open to using data as fit?
I think everyone wants to be as data-driven as possible. The trick is figuring out how to take all the data that is accessible to you and analyze it to pull out insights that you can be actionable on. In terms of like how data has changed and evolved, while I do support a lot of health and pharma brands, I'll take the consumer angle for a moment. I think that in the consumer space, we've realized that you have to tell a story that plays into cultural trends. So as an agency invested in data and analytics, we'll look at what's resonating with consumers and bring that back to brand teams to determine what's ownable. Ryan and I were just talking about this with the Nexium example. Because that pill was defined so much by its color, we could play on that color challenge and hijack that. Not everything is going to be ownable. Not every trend is going to make sense for you to hop on. But brands can find opportunities that are really relevant and that intersect with their brand value prop or something unique about their brand. And that's where I've really seen the evolution in the consumer space, where that's almost a mandate. We really can't have one-dimensional storytelling anymore. You have to be even more person-centered than you were before. And being person-centered means knowing what people care about and positioning your brand as culture forward. Having that deep-seated empathy for your audience that we talked about, over-indexing on intelligence about what your audiences care about most, and knowing what's trending across the media landscape, and pinpointing your most influential potential advocates, and then thinking really critically about the diverse and disjointed array of channels at their disposal, and really only then, injecting what's ownable about your brand to create these cultural moments of opportunity. So it's really about high touch, high reward marketing, not a brand bullhorn approach, earning attention, building with third-party validation, and then strategically knowing how and when to amplify those stories across platforms. So you're really achieving impact. You're not just using data to drive impressions and make your program perform better, but you're having an impact that's sort of beyond what you might originally think about with your brand's goals.
Well, which is where we focus a lot on data, but the storyline here is data-informed innovation. So right. How has data affected, I don't want to say how it's affected innovation, but innovation is more targeted. I imagine it can make it either easier or harder. Easier if you know exactly who you're talking to. How has it affected the creative?
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think there's a couple good examples in pharma on the physician side, or who we call HCPs, healthcare professionals. That could be nurses, that could be, other professionals in the kind of healthcare space. But on that side of things, we get pretty granular in terms of like prescribing habits and which health systems are they with, and how likely are they to prescribe our product. And we use that to inform a ton. And then also back to the sales reps that are responsible for visiting them, right? So we can kind of look at some of those habits, and then also some of the digital actions that the physicians have taken. And we can put in place triggers to let the sales rep know what therefore their next best action should be in their next kind of interfacing with that customer. So that's been really cool to kind of see that level of specificity and personalization. And then of course on like the asset creation side and content creation, we can take a lot of that and make sure that we are sending the right messages and content to specific segments. And that's where the human element comes back in, because when you're looking at how things have performed with those specific segments, it's important to kind of look under the hood. A really good recent example is we were looking at some email metrics with a very specific segment, and it had very high open rates, but almost no click rates, which is kind of strange. But we noticed they're opening the email multiple times. So what that told us was that segment, they're good with just kind of getting the information they need in the email itself. They don't need to click out, right? But if you had looked at that and just not kind of understood the context of who that segment was and looked kind of deeper, you wouldn't really know or understand, again, that context. And then something else, a really awesome example on the HCP side that's related. So you think about everything we've been through over the past year and a half and the blurring of personal and professional. We tested subject lines. One was started with Dr. Smith, and then the other subject line had their first name. And I've worked with, in HCP marketing for years. And it's a very, it's an audience that they like to be addressed as doctor. They like that. They like the separation of work and personal, but suddenly the first name is performing much better. I think, because things are getting more informal. And you also have like the new guard of doctors coming up through the ranks. So that definitely shows, again, it layers in that context and the human element.
And Lindsay, in terms of consumer, do you have any sort of comparisons in terms of your consumer experience of trial and error and figuring out at a granular level how this goes?
Yeah, I think data helps us almost expand the definition of innovation. And sometimes you can look at what's happening and it can drive not just marketing innovation, but product innovation as well. So Airstream is another one of our clients on the consumer side. And they had a really interesting 2020. They are the big silver trailers that everyone sees. In the work from home era, they saw a lot of these cultural conversations taking shape among editors and reporters and consumers about this notion of working from anywhere. I mean, we remember it's all everyone was talking about in March and April of last year. How are you going to work from home? How are you going to manage it if you have children? How do you turn off at the end of the day when there's no separation between where you live and where you work? And that was just a huge topic. Everyone was talking about it, but Airstream found a really smart way to enter the conversation. And by the end of the year, there were stories emerging about how old school Airstreams were enjoying this pandemic era popularity, and dealerships sales were actually up 22% in 2020, even though they were closed for about 6 weeks in the early COVID quarantine, like many businesses. And what was really powerful about this story and why I think it resonated is because the brand was leaning into cultural insights. They were activating real human brand ambassadors to tell the story about Airstream as a place where you could work from anywhere. They elevated this brand building storyline that really transcended audiences and reached consumers as well as the press that would write about it. And earlier this year, they actually announced a new model that had added office space to one of their big trailer models so that people truly could work from home wherever, not just in their existing Airstream, but in this new one that was equipped with an office. So that's product innovation. I think it's also, storytelling innovation, and it's all related to the data of what we were seeing pop in terms of conversation and sales, and really applying that smartly.
It sounds like data has really, I don't know if the word infiltrated or permeated all from the handshake sales rep deals to product development. I mean, it's in every sort of facet of communications, of business, and probably keeps going from here.
Yeah. And I think this expanded view of data as, not just the quantitative spreadsheet that someone might be envisioning, but really all elements of human data and cultural data and landscape data and contextual data, and how to marry that all together in a way that makes a lot of sense is where you find the innovation.
Excellent. Ryan, anything you want to add before we sign off? It's not to put you on the spot. If there's not, it's okay.
No, there is one area I really wanted to touch on, and that is storytelling from data. And I think that goes back to, the audience here, and then people like myself and Lindsay, who, again, are kind of natural born storytellers and creative types. And for me personally, I was always afraid of the data piece, but it's so important to be able to take, that stack of metrics and data points and research, and how do you kind of articulate the high level so what, or the story up to your leadership in like 1 or 2 bullet points. So how to get really good at that and kind of lean into being able to do that. And I think that's kind of the difference between analytics and insights. And I think people group them together a lot. But I think we've seen that shift too, being able to relay through social content and memes and things like that, if through infographics. People are loving getting information through infographics on Instagram and TikTok videos and things like that. So as a brand, how can you also tell a story to your consumers and your audience through kind of that easy, kind of watered down, digestible infographic type of way? I think that has been something that I've really noticed over the past year and a half, and that, I've been leading into more myself as a marketer.
Excellent. There's a lot to take in here. So
data's everywhere.
it is. That's the big takeaway, is data is everywhere. But I appreciate the conversation with both of you. Super enlightening. Lindsay in particular, thank you for the partnership with Imre in sponsoring this podcast, and the conversation will continue from here. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the PRovoke podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialists Marketeers. Support for this podcast comes from Notified, the integrated, intelligent and easy-to-use PR software. Get a free demo today at notified.com.